Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Java Graphics. Today we're going to be handling rectangular collisions. In other words, what happens when two rectangular objects on the screen collide or intersect on your frame. Now we're going to be using the code that we've done in prior videos in this series. So if you missed any, I'm going to put a link in the description below so you can catch up on anything you may have missed. If you want to learn Java programming or just programming in general, subscribe to this channel. We put out a lot of videos that range from beginner topics to more advanced programming concepts. Also, please like this video, share it with a friend, and write a comment as well. It goes a long way to help promote a channel like this. Now, let's get back to the video. So here we have two rectangles, a blue and a red. Now let's remember that the coordinate of the blue rectangle, we'll call it x, y, we'll put a b after it, so we'll call it xb, yb. That's the upper left position of the blue rectangle. Same thing with the red rectangle. We'll call that XR, YR. Now don't forget that each rectangle also has a width and a height. So the right edge of the blue rectangle would be the XB variable, which is the left edge, plus the width. The bottom edge of the blue rectangle would be YB, the top, plus the height. Same thing goes with the red rectangle. Now let's move these rectangles so they sort of overlap a little bit. So as you can see, the right edge of the blue rectangle is overlapping with the left edge of the red rectangle. Now we need to do a little bit of math in order to figure out when this occurs. And here it is. All we're going to have to do is check to see if the x-coordinate of the red rectangle, which is its left edge, is less than or to the left of the right edge of the blue rectangle, which is xb plus w. Of course, they could overlap on the other side, in which case the right edge of the rectangle, xr plus w, would have to be greater than or to the right of the left edge of the blue rectangle, xb. Now, if both of these conditions are true, we have a horizontal collision. In other words, the rectangles are overlapping each other horizontally. Not necessarily vertically, but they're overlapping horizontally. If we move the rectangles as follows, you can see that now they're overlapping vertically. As you can see, the top edge of the red rectangle is above the bottom edge of the blue rectangle. So what do we check? We're going to just check that YR, which is the top edge of the red rectangle, is less than or above the bottom edge of the blue rectangle, YB plus its height. They could overlap in this direction as well, in which case the bottom edge of the red rectangle, YR plus its height, would be greater than or below the top edge of the blue rectangle, which is YB. Now, if both of those conditions are true, we have a vertical collision. So when do we have an actual collision? Well, we're going to have an actual collision when we have a horizontal collision and a vertical collision. Now let's go over to NetBeans and actually make this work programming using the rectangles that we had from the prior video. So here's our program from last time. If I run this, you can see we have this rectangle. We have a ball jumping around the screen, bouncing off the edges, and I can move the rectangle using the arrow keys. So let me first get rid of the ball because we don't need any distractions. So let's get rid of the ball. We're not going to move it. We're not going to paint it. So now if I run the program, we don't have a ball. We just have a rectangle moving around the screen, which is exactly what we want. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a second rectangle. So let's go up here, and here we've declared a variable rectangle. Let's create a second one. We'll call it R2, just for simplicity. All right, so now let's come down here into the location of the code where we're instantiating our rectangle, and let's create a second one. So let me copy and paste this code. We'll call this R2, and instead of at position 100, 100, let's put it at position 400, 200. Remember, these things here are the boundaries of the screen. So now we have the second rectangle created. We need to actually draw it. So let's copy and paste this code. And we're now going to draw our second rectangle. There we go. Now let's just run and see what we see. And there it is. Here's our first rectangle, and there's our second rectangle. Now you notice the second rectangle is not moving. That's because in our loop method, we're calling rectangle move, but we're not calling move on the second rectangle because we don't want that one to move. We just want the first one to move. Second one will be stationary. So now what we want to do is we want to actually change, let's just run this again. We actually want to change this rectangle. Let's actually make it a different color and a different shape. So let's come over here, and in our rectangle class, let's add a method that allows us to change the attributes of this rectangle. So we'll call public void set attributes. And what are we going to allow them to set? Well, we'll allow them to set the width and the height. Okay. And then we're also going to allow them to change the color. So now you notice here, when we draw the rectangle, we're automatically setting the color to blue. Well, why don't we set the color to some variable? And let's create that variable. It'll be of type color. And we'll set that variable equal to blue. So now the rectangle will, well, it's still going to be blue. But we're going to also have a method here, public void set color, and we'll pass in the color of the rectangle. So this way we can actually change the width and the height of the rectangle. We can also change the color of the rectangle. So now in our main driver, when we create our rectangle right here, let's actually change some of the attributes. Let's say that R2 set attributes All right, so here what we're going to do is set the width to 300, the height to 150, and the color to red. Let's make sure that works, and there we go. Perfect. So now we can move this blue rectangle around, and it will hit the red rectangle. But you know what? Since we're moving the blue rectangle, maybe it's a good idea to have the blue rectangle appear in front of the red rectangle. So how do we do that? Well, that's very simple. Java's paint component will draw the images from back to front. So whatever you draw first will be behind whatever you draw second. As you can see here, we're drawing the red rectangle second. All we have to do to put the red rectangle behind the blue rectangle is draw the red rectangle first. And now when we run it, you can see that the blue rectangle appears in front of the red rectangle. Now we want to check for collisions. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some methods to our rectangle class so we can get the location. Okay, so now any rectangle can be asked, what's your X and Y position, what's your width, and what's your height. What we want to do now is we want to add one final method in our rectangle class which will detect for collisions. Now this rectangle inside here will check for a collision with another rectangle, which means we need to pass in the other rectangle that we want to check for a collision with. So we'll call this R. And we want to check for a collision between this rectangle that we're currently in and the one that's being passed in. Well, remember, the way we're going to do that is we're going to have this if statement. We're going to say if, and the first thing we're going to check is we're going to check to see if our left edge is less than the other rectangle's right edge, which is its X position plus its width. Now that has to be true, and something else has to be true. The right edge of our rectangle, whoops, that's X plus W, has to be greater than the rectangle that's being passed in, that rectangle's left edge. If both of these are true, we have ourselves a horizontal collision. But we also want to check for a vertical collision. So this checks for a vertical collision. So once again, our left edge is less than the other rectangle's right edge, and our right edge is greater than the other rectangle's left edge. That's a horizontal collision. And our top is less than the other rectangle's bottom, and our bottom is greater than the other rectangle's top. If all of those are true, we have ourselves a collision, and we want to return true, meaning we have a collision. Otherwise, if none of that is true, we'll return false. So this will detect a collision. So now let's go back to our driver, and in our loop method, let's call the detect collision method. So we're checking to see if we have a collision, and let's make a decision. Remember, this returns a Boolean. This will return true if there's a collision. So let's say if there is a collision, then what do we want to do? Well, let's change the second rectangle's color to red. I'm sorry, not red. It's already red. Let's change it to yellow. However, if there's not a collision, we'll make sure that it's red. So once again, in our loop method, which is happening 60 times a second, we're going to move our blue rectangle with the keys, but then we're going to check to see if there's a collision between the two. And if there is, we're going to set the rectangle's color to yellow. If there's no collision, we're going to set the color to red. I'm going to move the blue rectangle over, and as you can see, as soon as I get to the yellow rectangle and intersect it, it's now yellow, which means it's a collision. If I move off of it, it's red. I can move off it down this way. I can move off it down this way. And there are your collision detections. I hope you learned something from watching this video. Please remember to subscribe and share this video with others who are learning Java programming. Thanks for watching, and take care, everyone.